Well, here we are in session 9 and discussing the all-important topic of compensation. I'm sure it is something near and dear to your hearts, and hopefully now and in the future it'll be near and dear to your pocketbooks as well. Just a quick logistical note before we begin this final part of the course. Since we have no textbook nor text reading assignments, I will be providing all of the material through these lectures. Therefore, I will be using several website references to supplement the material. This is particularly true of some of the basic concepts. Using these supplemental materials is necessary to ensure that my lectures stay within reasonable limits, but still thoroughly cover the material at hand. Please understand that maintaining a reasonable length of lectures is not a matter of workload for me, but of logistical limitations of the media within which this course is conducted. Lectures over 30 to 45 minutes test the limits of YouTube storage and time required to upload to YouTube. A 30-minute lecture can take up to 2 hours or more to upload. Therefore, I try to keep the video lectures in the area of 30 minutes or so, which means the written lectures often approach or exceed 10 pages. Hence the use of the websites. These references will require your reading and study as you might do in a regular textbook material. You may even choose to supplement them with some web and other researches of your own. If you find a good site, let us know so others can benefit as well, and you can do that on the discussion forum. In this initial lecture on compensation, I will discuss the importance of compensation to the organization and to the individual. I'll also discuss how employees are motivated and how much that motivation is enhanced or limited by compensation. Obviously, there's no one answer as to how big an impact money has towards motivating employees. I suspect it varies by time, situation, and organization. In other words, I think motivation is a moving target. When we ask what motivates you, we should actually ask what motivates you now. And what motivates you now will probably change in the future. Certainly motivation changes in various stages of life. What motivates you as young people is much different than what motivates me as an old person. Neither is right or wrong. Both can be good, but it is different because of where we are in our lives. If you couple that with the fact that people in organizations are diverse and in many different stages of life all at the same time, motivation becomes a very challenging proposition indeed. In addition, in this lecture, we will use a fictitious example of a business to demonstrate some of the equity and perception issues that we will discuss in later sessions. And I hope to continue this fictitious business example throughout all of the lectures so we have some continuity and can actually relate this material to real business situations. I contend in the lecture that it is not a matter of if we spend money on compensation. It is a matter of how much we spend, and do we spend it wisely, efficiently, and effectively. Compensation can go a long way towards moving a company towards success, but it can also be a colossal waste of time. A colossal waste of money. It is possible, and it happens fairly frequently, for a company to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on pay and increases and just make people mad or more upset than they already were. Our quest is to learn how to invest our compensation dollars wisely towards success. After all, we can make people mad for free. Why spend hundreds of thousands of dollars doing it? Welcome to our discussion of compensation. Guess what? Pay is important. Isn't that a surprise? It is important to the individual for obvious reasons. It is important to the organization for equally obvious reasons. And it is important to our culture and our economy as well. And it is becoming even more important as we navigate into the future. This trend of increasing importance is often overlooked because currently there is more available labor than there are jobs. But I assure you, when there are more jobs than people available, the importance of pay is obvious to everyone. Our current labor market tends to create some complacency, but caution is in order. There are serious changes driving through our economy and culture, and our lives will be forever changed. We can already see some areas in the labor market where supply, labor, does not exceed jobs demand. There are some areas where there is actually a shortage of qualified people to fill the many open positions. One example is certain professional positions in the healthcare industry. There are many more positions that are expected to battle shortages of qualified people in the future. One of the primary reasons for these shortages is that our economy and resulting job needs are changing. We are becoming a knowledge-driven economy. I remember in years past, there were many unskilled and semi-skilled jobs available. A lot of these jobs were in manufacturing and provided good pay and benefits. Today, many of those jobs are gone, and we have progressed from jobs that had a physical base to jobs that are knowledge-based. This new economy requires more education. Now, I'm not referring only to college education, but to more education across the board. Even the old jobs that required more physical effort than knowledge now require special training. Take a look at auto mechanics. Now, back in the day, I used to do a lot of work on my own car. We were called shade tree mechanics. The work required some knowledge of mechanics, but much could be learned on the job through experience. Today, auto mechanics require extensive training. Cars have experienced a technological explosion, and the shade tree mechanics can no longer cope. The auto mechanic trade has progressed to a knowledge-based world. So what does this mean? Well, pay used to be easy to assess. Jobs were similar and based on physical effort, which was easily measured. Knowledge-based jobs are much more difficult to assess and measure, and it is much more difficult to find qualified candidates due to the additional qualifications required. Therefore, people are more critical to the success of the organization than ever before. The following website gives a general definition of a knowledge-based economy. Pay particular attention to the list of characteristics of a knowledge-based economy. One describes human capital and competencies and states that both are key components of value in the knowledge-based economy. If this is true, it follows that compensation is a key component to keeping that value inside the company. People with knowledge are important to creating a competitive advantage and reaching success. Lose an unskilled production worker and you can replace them the next day. No real loss in productivity, in service to the customer, or in profit. Lose a knowledge-based worker and you may take months to replace them, and the possible damage to productivity, customer relations, and profit is huge. To quote the authors of the book, Planning Wage and Salary Programs, I quote, to paraphrase a statement made by Lester Turow, workers are the only sustainable source of competitive advantage. Having the right talent has become a business necessity, end quote. Workers are no longer workers. They are a competitive advantage. And one of the greatest tools we have to keep good and valuable workers is an effective reward and base pay system. It's not just payroll anymore. So pay must reflect the knowledge economy in which people are more important to success. Pay must not only provide base support for people, pay must help motivate and reward workers to create that competitive advantage. Pay is important to the organization in assisting in the creation and maintenance of a competitive advantage. But compensation is also the single largest controllable budget item for most organizations, according to the book Planning Wage and Salary Programs. That's big money, and that makes it important. The following websites discuss the amount of money or budget allocated to compensation by typical companies. It varies greatly, but it's still a high number regardless. We've seen why pay is important to the economy and to the organization. But how about the individual? Well, as far as the individual goes, I realize that pay is a relatively uninteresting topic and has little meaning for most people. After all, most of us aren't concerned about how much we make because we have plenty of money to begin with. And we are more interested in a job that is enriching and fulfilling. I bet most of us would work for free given a decent job. No, I haven't been smoking or drinking anything that alters brainwaves. I do realize how important pay is to everyone, but I am amazed that something that important doesn't entice people to understand more about how pay is determined and how the pay process works. We complain a lot about it, but we don't know much about it. In truth, pay and how it is determined has been somewhat secretive for many organizations. Maybe if we don't explain it, people won't ask about it. That seems to be the philosophy behind creating a mystique around where pay and pay increases come from. The fact that money doesn't grow on trees, unless of course you're in the federal government, escapes mention in most of those discussions. Money, there's never seems to be enough to go around. We all want more pay, but have little understanding of how we got the pay we receive now. We tend to believe that we are not getting more pay because the boss is selfish and just doesn't want to share. Or we believe that we are not getting enough pay because someone else is getting too much or is getting our fair share. Now, all of this may be true in some cases, but pay is much more complex than those emotional assumptions allow. Have I ever received enough pay? Yeah, actually I have. More than once, I have felt my pay was adequate for what I was doing and for my contribution to the organization. However, I believe that realization came from understanding how pay was derived more than being a high-handed cosmic understanding of my personal presence in the universe. In other words, knowledge creates understanding, and understanding creates an awareness that if I want more money, I must contribute more or move to another organization that can afford to pay me more for the same contribution. Nothing wrong or bad about the company that couldn't pay more, but just a realization that everyone and everything has its limits. You know, I live in a house I can afford, and if I overstep those very practical bounds, I can't sustain the lifestyle for long and I go out of business. And when that happens, I ultimately live in an even smaller house than before, and everyone suffers much more than if I had lived in the appropriate house to begin with. Such is life, and such is business. We and companies must live within our means, and that affects how pay is determined. Are there inequities when it comes to pay? You bet there are. But everything is not an inequity, and everything is not an attempt by the company to be cheap and miserly. To recognize inequities, we must understand how pay is derived. Once we define the pay limitations of an organization or industry, then we can truly identify the inequities and address them. Even then, if we decide that our pay is inadequate, it is incumbent upon us to take corrective action and not necessarily incumbent upon the organization. We must decide to take the risk of requesting a pay review and let the organization respond, or we must be willing to change jobs or careers. Waiting for someone or some other entity to recognize and address your perceived inequity is certainly misplaced confidence in an inanimate system. Now, when working for Crown Wood Products, I had an employee who constantly reminded me that he worked harder than anyone else and was not paid enough for his contribution. Actually, he was not an exceptional worker and probably struggled just to approach average. However, he was great in his own mind. I was in a meeting with him and a group of hourly employees who were roughly his peers in terms of job responsibilities. He chose that time to publicly pitch his inequity complaint, hoping to garner sympathy from the other employees. It was an inappropriate time to grieve his situation, but he chose that time, I'm sure, intentionally. I listened to him for a few minutes and then interjected. I'll make you a deal. You always tell me how hard you work and that you should receive special pay for your contribution. And I keep telling you that I have many other people who work hard as well. If you can convince the other people in this room that you work harder and contribute more than they do, and therefore deserve to make more money than they do, I'll give you special pay. Needless to say, he was nearly shouted out of the room. Seems no one perceived that he worked harder than them, and most agreed that he didn't work nearly as hard as them. I never heard that complaint from him again. But it did give me an opportunity to discuss perceptions of work and equity and pay with an engaged group of employees. They walked out understanding that there is just so much money in that barrel, and my goal was not to keep them from getting any, but to make sure everyone received the portion they earned. Our inequity perception of ourselves tends to be vastly different than the equity perception of others towards us. Again, he was great in his own mind, but in no one else's. This latter part of the course will focus on three aspects of compensation. First, we will focus on the importance of pay to the success of any organization. We will, as we have done with the above discussion, explore the importance of pay to the individual, and we will explore reward systems and how they may motivate people, or conversely, how pay may demotivate people. We will talk in generalities, but give you a feel for how compensation relates to and affects the surrounding universe. Second, we will become more specific and discuss establishing a base pay process within an organization. The base pay process or system is the baseline from which reward systems evolve. If we set up a basic or innovative reward system on a faulty, ineffective, or unfair base pay system, we can actually do great harm to the organization, both financially and culturally. But at the same time, having an effective base pay system without additional rewards just doesn't seem to use our money wisely. And that's really the story. How do we spend our money in the most effective and efficient manner? How do we get the most bang for our compensation buck? Now, the third part of our discussion is the shortest of the three, but just as important. It will discuss some trends and innovative compensation programs now and in the future. What can you expect in your future related to pay and specifically to indirect compensation and variable reward programs? When we finish, I hope you gain an understanding of how pay fits into the organization, how to construct a base pay system upon which to build, and some innovative approaches to pay that you can use to wow or excite someone in your current or your future job. Remember, it's not a matter of do we spend money on compensation. It is only a matter of how much we spend and how effective those expenditures will be. And just like anything else in life, you get what you pay for. And organizations of all sizes pay a great deal to compensate workers. The previous websites, as I explained earlier, give an indication of how much should be allocated to pay expenses. It varies greatly by industry and business, but none of the expenses are insignificant. We are talking big money. And when we talk big money, we are talking big money coming out of limited resource called revenue. How we spend those limited financial resources is a critical decision for most organizations. Unfortunately, as with our discussion of hiring, pay receives little more than passing consideration in the strategic plan of many businesses, and we are often content with doing just enough to get by. Time to drag out my soapbox and give my understated, meek opinion. Let me say this gently. Pay is not an expense. It is an investment. That said, we must understand one more important pay fact. Most investments are optional. With my personal money, I don't have to make an investment. Pay is not. Pay is mandatory. Unless you can find an entire population of employees willing to work for free, and since that's unlikely, organizations must spend a substantial amount of money paying employees. The money will surely leave the organization. Will it be spent or will it be invested? As an organization, are we paying too much? Are we paying too little? If we paid just a little more, would there be a positive impact on our success? If we paid differently, would we use our dollars more wisely? Are we currently spending wisely or foolishly? These are just some of the questions that must be asked when setting up a pay system, but also must be re-asked each year while we maintain the system we have set up. These are the questions I hope to help you understand so that you can ask them appropriately in your own companies. To ask them properly, you must first buy into the fact that pay is not an expense. Pay is an investment. And if we view pay as an expense, the answers are very different to these questions, and we have a very different looking and functioning company. We have a company that accepts mediocrity and embraces just enough mentality rather than a company that strives for excellence. There I go again, using that term excellence. Not survival, but excellence. See a pattern? I believe organizations make a choice. Mediocrity or excellence? Survival or greatness? How do you tell where your company is? Well, pay is one indicator. Not necessarily high pay, but pay and compensation that is treated as an investment rather than merely an expense. So hold on while I climb down off my soapbox and try to demonstrate the pay challenge in practical terms. You know, it is difficult for us to get out of our mindset as a receiver of pay and make the transition as a giver of pay. It is difficult to gain the objectivity necessary to see the other side. Therefore, we are going to start our own business. Well, actually, it is a fictitious business that will allow us to see things from the owner or management side. And we will refer back to this example periodically during our discussions throughout this semester to be put into that management mindset. A brief summary of our company follows. S&C Helpers Incorporated provides in-home services ranging from repair, maintenance, installation, in-home projects, assistance in computers or electronic setup, and our repair. If you need something done around the house and you don't have the time or expertise, call S&C Helpers. Our company has two divisions, the Technical and Electronics Assistance Division and the Home Projects Division. The Home Projects Division provides assistance to basic home repairs, repairing of walls and floors and furniture and garage doors and windows, etc. They provide assistance in product installation, installing water heaters and basic plumbing and basic electrical. Assistance in basic construction, such as building sheds and porches and small rooms and decks. In other words, we are the handymen or handywomen. We have 15 employees in this division, and most are semi-skilled. Our customer base includes anyone who needs home repairs or simple home renovations. We also contract out to major retailers such as Home Depots, Lowe's, Sears, etc. to do many of their installations of appliances and large home products. The Technical and Electronics Division, our Technical Electronics Division provides services to customers who need complex electronic system installation, alarm systems, innovative electronic product displays, or assistance with computers or computer systems, sound and theater systems, etc. Employees in this division are very skilled and may actually have advanced technical certifications or may be degreed engineers or computer experts. As in the Home Projects Division, our technical and electronic services are offered to individuals or as a contractual arrangement for major retailers, and we have 10 employees in this division. In addition To these critical employees, our company employs several people to provide support for our core businesses, such as accountants, administrative assistants, HR professionals, marketing professionals, etc. In total, we have nearly 70 employees. The composition of the employees in the payroll, as I said, 15 employees in the home projects division and 10 in technical and electronics help. Our annual revenues are $15 million, and our average pay for home projects is $50,000 per year per person, and the average pay for the technical and electronics division is $65,000 per year per person. That does not include benefits. If you take a look at that, 50,000 times 15 employees in home projects is $750,000 that we pay per year in payroll. And in the technical division, we have 65,000 times 10 employees, or 650,000 that we pay in that division, for a total critical payroll, or I should say total payroll for critical people, of $1,400,000. Our support payroll, or all of those folks who are HR, accountants, administrative assistants, and etc., is $2,350,000, or an average of $52,222 per person. Our total annual payroll is $3,750,000, which is about 25% of our annual revenue. Now, obviously, there are many more details surrounding starting a business. Marketing strategies, buildings, finance, employees, vendors, creditors, banks, and on and on. We will keep our example relevant to HR in general and compensation specifically, and we'll only delve into the other factors when they are related to compensation issues, and we'll get to those as we need them. So let's take a look at this. We have revenue, and we have people, and we have a budget for pay. Let's assume that we have a good year and we're going to grant a pay increase to employees. We can afford to give 3% of payroll, and we'll talk about how we come up with that number in another session. So we can afford to give a 3% increase, which amounts to $112,500, 3% of our total payroll. So how do we spend that money? Do we just divide it up equally among all employees? That would mean that each employee would get $1,607 for an annual increase. It would break out like this. Home project employees who are making $50,000 a year on average would receive a 3.2% increase. Technical and electronic employees who are making $65,000 on average would receive a 2.4% increase. And the other employees, support employees who are making $52,222 per year, would receive a 3.1% increase. From a dollar standpoint, that is even. Everybody gets the same. But from a percentage standpoint, it is very uneven. Are our technical and electronic employees happy? Are they happy with a 2.4% increase when everybody's getting above 3? Probably not. So even though an even distribution of our increased funds sounds equitable, it hides many issues and problems. And we will explore these specific problems and issues in future sessions. Do we spend it all in the first? Another issue is, do we spend it all in the first of the year, or do we spend it throughout the year? If we spend all of this $112,500 during the first part of the year, it's more expensive. We spend it all year long. But if we spend it throughout the year, in other words, giving employees a pay increase on their anniversary date instead of January 1st, it costs less. And we can therefore grant more money towards increases. It might even go up to $115,000 that we can afford to spend rather than $112,500 because we're spreading it out over the year. Our barrel of money becomes larger just by spreading the expense over the entire year rather than spending it all on January 1st. Sounds like an interesting concept, and we'll talk more about that as well. Will we use the money to gain something in return, or do we merely spend it? Do we split the money and reward good performers with more of an increase? In other words, do we reward performance Or do we treat all performance as equal and give everybody the same amount of money? If we give good performers more, we must give others less. Remember, it is a limited resource after all. And what do we use to justify the difference between those who get more and those who get less? If it is performance, do we have a performance appraisal system that is sophisticated enough to sell that difference to employees? Lots of questions and lots of possibilities. And the examples above don't come close to covering all of the options and issues available. Before we decide how to spend our funds, we need to understand our options for spending it wisely. How do we get the biggest bang for our buck? We need to determine what we actually want to accomplish with our investment. And I believe the above example illustrates some of those issues very graphically. To do this, we must look at two things. What motivates people, and what are our competitors in the labor market and the business marketplace doing in terms of pay? What are they doing in terms of increases in reward systems, etc.? Yes, it is about keeping up with the Joneses, if you've heard that term before. Don't be afraid to look cool in the marketplace. If our competitors are driving a sports car and we are driving a beat-up old 2006 station wagon, chances are we won't be driving long, at least not with the current group of employees, because they'll leave. They'll go to the sports car. So let's start with what makes people do things. What motivates people? What drives them to do what we want them to do instead of something else? That's a big question that people have been pondering for many centuries. Smart people have been pondering, and just when someone comes up with an answer, someone else disagrees and comes up with something different. I'm going to pick two smart people that have been included in many textbooks and other publications. Their theories have been disputed and to some extent have been refuted, but they seem to live on with some common sense explanations of why people are motivated. You've probably heard of Abraham Maslow and Frederick Hertzberg in other classes, but we will use their theory here as well. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Frederick Hertzberg's motivation theory are two explanations of motivation that I have always found compelling. They form a good framework on which to understand motivation, and at least in Hertzberg's case, relate directly to pay in the workplace. Since you've probably heard of them before in other classes, I won't go into a long explanation of the theories, but you can review them in these websites and also see some of the recent criticisms. Now, I believe that Maslow relates to pay in one very specific way. His theory states that the base needs must be met first before the other needs become motivating. And he has 5 levels of needs, starting with the physiological, going to the safety, then love and belonging needs, esteem needs, and what he calls self-actualization. And you can see definitions of those on the website. And those needs must be met in order. So the physiological needs must be met before anyone is concerned about safety or belonging. In other words, physiological needs such as air and food and drink and shelter, warmth, sex and sleep must be met before higher needs like safety and security can become motivators. Now, I'm not sure where the sex part fits into the workplace, so we should probably be careful with that one. But we must have the basic needs satisfied before we will seek things like friendship, family, etc. If we are hungry, we are only interested in making new friends if they can meet our need for food. If we feel unsafe or insecure, we are only interested in joining a new group if they can make us feel safe. But joining a group for social gratification is the furthest thing from our minds. Needs must be met in order. Such is the case with pay. Base pay must be perceived adequate to meet normal individual and family needs before incentive pay motivates positively. People working in sweatshops making 50 cents an hour in horrid or unsafe working conditions probably aren't going to respond to an incentive program that offers them 2% more if they work twice as hard. Base pay must be adequate before other fancy pay programs are effective. Now, Hertzberg divides motivation factors into two parts. First, there are hygiene factors, and second is motivators. Hygiene factors are things such as company policies and administration, supervision, working conditions and interpersonal relationships, salary, status, security, etc. Motivators are things like achievement, recognition, interest in the task performed, responsibility for enlarged or greater task, growth and advancement to higher levels in the organization, and so on. Motivators motivate people. Hygiene factors don't motivate people. However, if perceived to be unfair or inequitable, they may demotivate people. And notice, pay is listed as a hygiene factors. Motivators are soft items such as achievement, challenge, or recognition. These factors do motivate, and so motivational programs should be built around these aspects of the organization. Putting these two theories together, we come up with the conclusion that our pay system should be built in layers. Base needs should be met through base pay. Then we can develop innovative incentive programs that drive employees to perform at higher levels by using the attraction of Maslow's higher needs of esteem and self-actualization and Hertzberg's motivators to guide the development of those programs. In addition, we must maintain constantly Hertzberg hygiene factors. I have seen companies that pay very high wages and have great benefits, but house the most demotivated and unhappy employees. Why? Well, the organizational policies are restrictive and unfair, supervision is terrible, working conditions are unsafe or dirty or unpleasant, job security is questionable, which goes back to Maslow's basic needs. Pay is great, but the other things are terrible. On the other hand, I have seen organizations that pay moderately, but have happy, well-adjusted, and motivated employees because all of those other things are great. Motivation is not about money. It's about a lot of other things. But money can destroy all motivation. And I believe if used properly, contrary to Hertzberg, money can also motivate. And we'll discuss that later as well. And we're going to try to see if we can apply these two theories to motivate our employees in our company, S&C Helpers Incorporated. I also believe that money and motivation is not necessarily about reality, but about perceptions. Remember our discussion on company brand? If our company has a strong base pay system, but is perceived weak, which concept wins the day? Probably the perception rather than the reality. We saw that with our discussion of Walmart. They are not the lowest paying retail chain with the worst benefits, but people believe they are, and that perception brands the company. Pay, as it relates to motivation and the investment of pay, is also about comparison. It's about keeping up with the Joneses. People compare one company to another and expect organizations, at least within the same industry, to pay similarly. If one textile manufacturer pays $15 per hour and another textile manufacturer pays $10 per hour, those in the latter company are going to likely perceive an inequity. The first step in developing a strong and effective base pay system is to determine where we are internally and in comparison with the external marketplace. Find out where we are, where we want to go, and determine the gap between the two. How do we do that? That is the first topic of the next session. So what do we take away from this session? Pay is important. Compensation is big money. It is not do we spend on compensation, but how much do we spend, and are those expenditures an investment or an expense? Compensation pulls from a limited resource called revenue. The barrel is only so big. Organizations that treat compensation as an expense tend to adopt the just enough philosophy and accept mediocrity. Those who view compensation as an investment tend to adopt excellence as a goal. I'm sure there are other nuggets that you can pull from this discussion, but that's enough to get us started. So let's take the next step into the next session.